Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Bit later today, it's a sort of Easter weekend and all that kind of carry on going on. A big meal today, so yeah, sorry it's a bit late. Let's go to the usual opening gambit. The Ukrainian losses for the Russian forces for the day before. All the usual caveats, inaccurate propaganda. I find these indicatively useful and more accurate than people give them credit for. I look more at the kind of trends than the actual total numbers, for example. Anyway, 470 liquidated personnel, still on the lower end of the spectrum compared to what it has been. We are seeing culmination, mud, and these sort of ideas feeding into the figures that are lower than they have been. 4 APCs, no tanks at all. 13 artillery systems. Now that is a decent number for the Ukrainians. There's been, I think, a concerted effort to take out artillery systems and pieces, real counter battery effort, and that is paying dividends. I'm sure it will pay dividends come the counter offensive. They will need to take these out, not only because they are the biggest cause of Ukrainian deaths at the moment, but they will be a real thorn in the side of a counter offensive. 14 drones, 3 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 5 pieces of special equipment. That is a very high number of pieces of special equipment. I've said before that it's hard to know whether they are large pieces of, say, mechanized equipment or a single radar piece on a tripod or on the top of the building. They're all obviously useful. The size doesn't mean everything, guys. We go and have a look at a piece of such a piece of special equipment. Here is a destroyed Russian Neba SVU radar that's been taken out. This type of equipment hasn't been seen earlier in Ukraine. It's used for automated detection and tracking of aerial objects. This is a source of thing that you would imagine makes up the special equipment list or total number on a daily basis. And that is going to be, you would assume, a significant loss for the Russians, that kind of capability. I'm sure they don't have too many of these, and they will provide a very useful ability to detect aerial objects. Here we have an aerial object getting taken out. So yesterday I showed a video of this plane being shot down from a different angle. This is a Su-25, Russian Su-25. You can see it get hit there and then go down and explode. We did see the parachute come down in the previous video. It's a bit of a, Hobson's choice, isn't it? If you fly too high, you're more vulnerable to air defense systems, your NASAMS or whatnot. And if you fly low, you are vulnerable to things like your Stingers and your MANPADS, your portable air defense systems. So, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. These planes are flying low, but as you can see there, one of them was taken out of the sky. Talking of NASAMS, air defense systems, these are the Norwegian-American co-production. They've got several of these systems in Ukraine. They are being given more missiles quite consistently, and that's because they seem to be using them. So apparently they've taken out over 100 Russian cruise missiles and drones since the beginning or since November when they started getting these. That is pretty significant. It's a decent checklist to, decent bunch of notches on their, not that on their bedhead. That'd be ridiculous. On the side of their machine. So these are proving to be incredibly useful pieces of air defense. Okay. What have the Ukrainians been up to? Well, overnight there were explosions, loud explosions heard in Sevastopol. That is, it could be from missiles, could be from drones, it could be from air defense missiles. So yesterday I told you about Feodosia, which is down in the south or sort of east of Crimea. Sorry. That was significant because the explosions there. Now the Russians are claiming that the explosions were as a result of debris falling down from the missile or whatever it was taken out by air defense systems. Could well have been. The question is, well, not the question. The observation is, isn't it incredible that the Ukrainians are being able to hit targets or almost hit targets over here, which is not far from Kerch. So you can imagine that they could do a saturation attack on the Kerch Bridge once that is up and running again, the rail bridge, which is soon to be fixed. I just found that quite remarkable that they're able to take aim at some of these places much further away here. Don't know whether they're missiles. Don't know whether they're drones. So same for Sevastopol. Don't know whether they hit their targets either. Whether the Russians are being truthful in their claims that it is air defense missiles that are taking down those aerial threats, or whether they've reached their targets. The Russians have got back to their usual business. I don't know that they haven't had any periods of not doing this, but the Russians have shelled, as according to the Ukrainians, peaceful settlements of the Kherson region 71 times. They fired 495 shells with MLRA, multiple launch rocket artillery, mortars, artillery, tanks, AGS, that's heavy infantry support weapon, that's a sort of grenade launcher, drones, aviation, Kherson Regional Military Administration report. So the idea is that they're throwing everything they have across the river in Kherson, and that appears to be a continued problem for the Ukrainians. There's partial destruction of residential building, followed by fire on an area of 100 square meters due to the shelling of Zaporizhia by the Russians. This is mentioned in a few places. Quite a bit of destruction caused in Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia seems to be one of those places that just gets routinely hit daily or nightly even, often with S-300 rockets. And here we have a railway line near Sloviansk. So just to remind you where Sloviansk is, if we come on the map, back to the map and look to the west of Bakhmut, you have Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk, all in this kind of semicircle of cities or towns. That would be the next line of defense after Bakhmut. And you think how long it's taken the Russians to not take Bakhmut. Well, imagine what it'd be like for these places. But these places have been hit consistently by the Russians over the months. And this is a railway line being hit. Railway lines are actually relatively quick to fix. However, they're still a really valuable target to take out. So if you have, 2 days of the railway not being used, then that is a considerable loss to the logistics of either side. And here we have a railway being taken out in Sloviansk. So that is going to be a useful objective, successfully hit by the Russians. Okay, now let's go to odds and sods and bits and pieces. Talk to you quite a bit about these leaks that have been out last few days. They've actually been out for longer than that. And Bellingcat, one of the my mate went to school with the guy that runs Bellingcat, the Elliot, what's his face? Anyway, that's random. So this is reporting Bellingcat doing some investigation on the sources of these leaks. If not the sources, then the initial platforms that were used to spread this information. Bellingcat has seen evidence that some documents dated to January could have been posted online even earlier, although it's unclear exactly when. Bellingcat also spoke to 3 members of the Discord community. So Discord is kind of like a communication platform used for gamers, where the images had been posted, who claimed that many more documents had been shared across other Discord servers in recent months. Ukrainian officials have cast doubt on the veracity of the documents, with Mikhailo Podolyak, the advisor to the head of the Office of President of Ukraine, stating on Telegram that he believes Russia is behind a purported leak, but US security officials quoted that the New York Times appeared to hint at their authenticity. Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov told CNN that the documents showed the extent of US and NATO involvement in Ukraine, and yet one pro-Russian Telegram channel has been providing updates on the conflict, wasn't convinced, and said it was possible the documents could be Western disinformation. The end result is no one quite knows who's behind these. I would say they are leaks of authentic documents. That's my take on the matter. Lots of analysis of where these popped up and what servers and what place. So it's not just Discord. We've got Telegram, 4chan, Uh, and then, as part of this, it says it therefore seems that either the Donbass Devushka Telegram account or a previous source posted by this account altered the original image to paint the Ukrainian losses as heavier than in the original assessment. This is the idea that at some point, the original documents were then doctored to show that Ukrainians have made bigger losses than the Russians, and Bellingcat has narrowed that down to one particular source or a source that source uses, and that's where that came from. But they aren't the original, and in fact, it seems like there's talk about this. I think is it a 4chan server, Wow Mao. May not be the original source of these documents. Bellingcat spoke to members of a separate Discord community who claimed that other images had been posted earlier on yet another since deleted server, often called Thug Shaker Central, but which had also had several other names at different times. Image files shown to Bellingcat detailed a further document in the same style and formatting of those posted in the Wow Mao server that was dated to January the 13th. So these documents have basically been photographed. I don't know whether that makes any particular difference that they're photographed, not electronic, not scanned, or whatever. According to Vaki, so one of the people they spoke to, and two other users who spoke to Bellingcat, but declined to be identified by their usernames, the files that were leaked onto Wow Mao are only the tip of the iceberg compared to the quantity of documents posted onto Thug Shaker Central. And I talked yesterday how they're not just about Ukraine, China, Indo-Pacific, all sorts of stuff is within these documents. Now, the original Thug Shaker is quite interesting. Their accounts of the server's general nature also independently coincided. The name of the Thug Shaker server frequently changed, sometimes to that of a racial slur, and that had around 20 active users making up a tight-knit community, members said. Posts and channel listings showed that the server's users were interested in video games, music, Orthodox Christianity, and fandom for the popular YouTuber Oxide. This server was not especially geopolitical in nature, although its users had a staunchly conservative stance on several issues, members told Bellingcat. Racial slurs and racist memes were shared widely. Now, I don't know whether that coincides with the sort of people who would be anti support for Ukraine, financial support from the US government, and whether these would be American users, so on and so forth. Is there a political element there? But it still doesn't really. There's still no definitive information or much information at all on where these originally came from. It does appear that they are from American sources rather than being leaked by Ukrainians. Certain pieces of these documentation will not have been accessed by Ukrainians. So it does appear that this has come from within the US. I would say they are authentic. But past that, it's still people are still looking into it. Okay, so moving on. We have the pro-Russian channel Rebar reporting on, in fact, this is reported elsewhere as well, but it took some time for me to find it. It's only just coming through. But Rebar reported yesterday that on the eve of Catholic Easter and anti-war this morning, an anti-war rally was held in Berlin. At least 3,000 local residents marched through the central streets in the city, speaking out against the supply of weapons to Ukraine. And this is how Rebar see it and report it. 3,000 according to them in Berlin. It does look like slightly more of an anti-war demonstration. There's more CND, as you can see, CND symbology going on here. So I don't know, or this could still be being fermented by pro-Russian agencies. I'm not really sure at the moment. The Guardian reports this. Several thousand people took part in traditional Easter peace marches in around 70 German towns and cities on Saturday, calling for the government to push to an end to the Ukraine war. According to the Peace Cooperative Network, around 2,000 people took to the street in Berlin, so slightly different figures, while 1,200 attended rally in Hanover and peace marches in Bremen, Munich, blah, 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 blah. Now, Uh, so traditional rallies, which used to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people in the early 1980s, this year called for an end to the German arms export to Ukraine and a rollback of plans to expand and rearm the German armed forces. So this is being framed here by The Guardian that actually this is relatively insignificant compared to the sorts of marches that you saw back in the 80s, which might well have been, fueled by the Cold War and anti-Russia. Now you've got these much smaller rallies in support of peace. However, here is the interesting sort of little nugget. One of the banners saying NATO is the aggressor, peace with Russia. You know exactly whose side these guys are on there, at least for some of them. The marches were criticised in political circles. At the very least, there's something naive to this year's Easter marches, said Thorsten Frey of the Conservative Christian Democratic Union, CDU. They're one of the main parties in Germany. So that is as interesting. So two different ways of seeing that, I guess. Now, this has just come out. So this is just updated before I read out the previous one. French Defense Ministry denies presence of French soldiers in Ukraine. So this is coming from the leaks again. The French Defense Ministry has denied the presence of French soldiers in Ukraine as allegedly revealed in documents attributed to the Pentagon and leaked to the Russian networks midweek. A spokesperson for the Minister of Armed Forces, Sébastien Lecornu, said there are no French forces engaged in operation in Ukraine. The documents cited do not come from the French armies. We do not comment on documents whose source is uncertain. Now, this is the claim that there are forces from France, America, Britain, and Latvia active in Ukraine. Small contingent of less than 100 special operations personnel, says one slide. I would say that almost certainly is true. I would put my mortgage on the UK armed forces being out there. The UK special forces being out there. There's almost no doubt in my mind. I won't. Yeah, whatever. And I would imagine the French special forces are out there. They'll be training. They'll be involved in maybe intelligence work. They won't be near the front line because it's way too risky. But I'm absolutely certain they will be out there in some capacity. Right, moving on to military aid. Not a lot to report, really. Zelensky has said that Poland is to send 200 Rosomak infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine. They'll provide these and they'll arrive in the nearest future. Now, these are infantry fighting vehicles or APCs, depending on what their variant is. They're fairly recent, as in, it's not like BMP-1 from the, from 50s, 60s, whatever. These are newer vehicles. I don't know how good they are, but they are going to be super, super useful with the coming counteroffensive. And my wonder is, will they get over to Ukraine to give them time to train on them, to get them to know them, to get them to be able to know how to maintain them, get the logistics line sorted out in time for the counteroffensive, which will probably happen late May? I don't know. But super useful for them to get 200 of these just like that, right? 200, brilliant. Now, the flip side of that is worrying about timelines. Quite often they announce these things long after they've been promised and sorted out. And in fact, sometimes they're arriving in Ukraine when they get announced that they're being given. So it might be that this has been on the cards for a long time already. The leaked war papers that I've talked about already show Wagner Group sought to purchase arms from Turkey. The US reportedly gained access to the internal plans of Wagner Group, which showed that it has sought to purchase arms from Turkey, a NATO ally. The Washington Post reported, citing the leaked papers. According to the report, some Wagner personnel met with Turkish contacts to purchase weapons and equipment from Turkey for Wagner's efforts in Mali and Ukraine. But it's unknown as to how successful that was. So we don't know whether they actually got those weapons from Turkey or not. And that's really it in terms of military aid. Moving on to sort of geopolitical stuff. Euromaidan Press talks about how Twitter has removed restrictions, and I'm sorry, I'm going to bash Elon Musk again here, or Twitter, or both. Twitter removes restrictions on Russian government accounts, the Telegraph says. Tests from multiple accounts confirm that Twitter's search results, timeline, and recommendation tools show Kremlin-linked accounts, according to the Telegraph. Now, we've heard last week that they are burying Ukraine news by putting it down a priorities list. So anything about Ukraine news gets shunted down. It's part of their algorithm, part of the coding that has been put in place. It lumps Ukraine news with disinformation or misinformation. It's hugely problematic, the approach Twitter has taken to this war at the moment. And here's another example. And you've had now, Dmitry Medvedev just spewing racist and genocidal bile on Twitter, and it's all right. It's got a blue tick, job done, fantastic. It turns out you can pay $8 to be able to, spread whatever bile and get that amplified because you've got the blue tick. Just, oh my goodness. So you then start seeing memes like this, and whether you love this guy or not, and life is nuanced, right? So he can be brilliant in certain areas. He can do marvelous things for Tesla, do great things for SpaceX. But what he's doing with Twitter is just, in many ways, beyond the pale. I could bore you for a good hour, the amount of people that are complaining about stuff that's going on. There's been some incredibly insane things going on Twitter over the last week. I will mention just one thing. So Brett Weinstein, who is famously anti-cancel culture and all this kind of stuff, has warned Elon Musk. So this is one of the darlings of the alt-right for many people. That the thing where the left eats its own, we mustn't let that happen to the emerging Western values free speech coalition. Many of us have backed your Twitter play and taken substantial heat for it. Are thrown by this move. The public square isn't a monopoly, and this is that. And the move is that Substack, which is kind of a blog thing that is not quite an alternative to Twitter, but people use it in concert with Twitter, or they have their own stuff on Substack that they then pass down for Twitter. Anyway, Matt Taibbi here says, of all things, I learned earlier today that Substack links were being blocked on this platform. When asked why, I was told it's a dispute over the new Substack Notes platform. And then Elon Musk replied to Brett Weinstein saying Substack links were never blocked. Matt's statement is false. Substack blah, 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 blah. Turns out Matt is or was an employee of Substack, whatever. So he's saying that that's false. But this is the glory of the situation. Twitter's own automatic appending to tweets disproves Elon Musk, because it then says right underneath that, Twitter has started marking links to Substack as unsafe. If you click on a link on Twitter with substack.com in the URL, users can visit Substack pages, but not via the hyperlink from Twitter. So basically, Twitter has blocked Substack. And that you've got Elon Musk saying, we have not blocked Substack. This is complete. He's lying. This is total rubbish. He's only saying that because he's an employee of Substack. And then Twitter itself appends that, we've blocked Substack. It's like, no. Anyway, point is that there's all sorts of shenanigans going on, and it's generally favoring. I mean, if we go back to what's happening back here, it is favoring Russia. Right? It's favoring Russia over Ukraine. And if the TLDR of this, the too long didn't read of all this is to take from this, is that these moves are favoring Russia in the information space, and that is a worry. Okay. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the IMF saying that state-owned enterprises, SOEs, these are kind of like government, state-run enterprises, right? Government manufacturing industries or services or whatever. They need to change. They need to the structure of them, or the corporate governance of them, needs to adapt to fall in line with what the IMF dictates. Now, I've long said that it's great that Ukraine's getting all this money from all these different places, but I do worry about the strings attached. Now, it could be the strings attached with the IMF. They're giving $15.6 billion over 4 years or whatever it is. It could be that those strings attached are really good. It could be that they are getting these state-owned enterprises to do things properly in terms of corruption, in terms of transparency, in terms of X and Y and Z. But it could also be a way of getting in free market capitalist ideology into state-run enterprises. So there could be an ideological angle to this as well. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying, it's interesting to know what these strings attached might be. Actually, so the Kyiv Independent does, it looks like a weekly thing on this. So Ukraine state-owned enterprises weekly issue 82, and it looks at exactly what the IMF have in terms of their conditions, IMF's conditionalities, structural benchmarks, and all sorts of things concerning what they require of Ukraine to do in order to get that money. And as I say, I'm not sure whether this is good or bad. I haven't had the time to look into it. But as you can see, it is fairly substantial, right? And that's just this week's information on the topic. But I do, it is a worry because there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So if money is going to Ukraine, there will be some quid pro quo. There is going to be something, the quid pro quo. In the most benign sense, will be that the rest of the world are getting security, that is being provided by Ukraine on behalf of the rest of the world against Russia and to some extent China, so on and so forth. So you could see that, but then there'll be other very explicit demands being made by these donors saying, actually, we're going to give you this, but we want this in return. We want a stake in that. We want a piece of this. We want a piece of that. So there will be different ways of looking at that process. It's well worth looking at Perun's latest video on NATO. Perun's video is fabulous. There have been so many people on my threads who have been real pro-Americans generally, who are really annoyed at the rest of the world not paying enough money for NATO and saying we should leave NATO and leave you to defend yourselves. They don't understand what the US gets out of NATO. They just don't understand NATO. Go and watch Perun's video. If you're one of these people, and there will be several of you watching this, a lot of you watching this probably, who say, oh, NATO, it's not worth the US, all the money we put in. You need to understand that what NATO gives for the US in terms of economics, in terms of cooperation, in terms of all sorts of things. So even if they pay over more than other people, they're still going to get a benefit out of it. But that's not to say they shouldn't get the other nations to pay more. I'm not denying that, but there will be gains for the US that they probably, unless you've looked into NATO a lot, you probably won't be aware of. And even if the gains for them aren't as much as the gains for another nation, so it might be that Latvia gains like 100 units of benefit and the US gains 1 unit of benefit, it's still a benefit to the US, right? And if the US is gaining that in lots of ways, and Latvia only gains it in one way, then actually the US gains more than Latvia overall, if you look at the whole picture. So there are loads of dynamics that go on with NATO that aren't so obvious that they would jump out to you. Go and watch Perun's video. It is fantastic. Anyway, that ends today's Ukraine war news update. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Have a wonderful weekend, whatever you're doing. I'm just going to sit and eat. Yeah, I will try and get out some further videos today. I can't promise it. Family and all that, they tend to get in the way, I find. Joke. Anyway, toodle pips. Speak soon.